It's the middle of the night in 1999. While most of America sleeps, something is happening inside one of the most heavily guarded computer networks on the planet. It isn't a glitch, it isn't a drill. Someone has slipped into the Pentagon systems, and the strangest part is that not a single alarm goes off. Whoever this is moves like they've done it 100 times before, opening files, watching, waiting. And here's the part that makes it so unsettling. Just days earlier, the same intruder had already broken into NASA and walked away with software worth close to $2 million. This wasn't a foreign spy or a trained military operative. It was a 15-year-old kid sitting alone in his bedroom, quietly humiliating two of the most powerful institutions on Earth. This is the story of Jonathan James. Jonathan grew up in a quiet, unremarkable suburb outside Miami, Florida. Nothing about his neighborhood stood out, except for what was inside his house. His father, Robert James, worked in software, which meant the family home was full of computers, cables, and technical manuals long before most kids his age had even touched a keyboard. By the time Jonathan was 6 years old, he was already spending hours at the family computer, not just playing games, but taking things apart to understand how they worked. He wanted to know what was happening behind the screen, and the only way to find out was to keep pulling at threads other kids never noticed. By his teenage years, that curiosity had turned into something much bigger. At one point, Jonathan wiped Windows off the family computer entirely and installed Linux instead, just so he could understand a computer at its most basic level. That single decision told his parents everything they needed to know. This wasn't a hobby anymore. His mother and father were proud of how far ahead of his classmates he was, but the sheer intensity of it worried them. Jonathan would stay up all night in front of a monitor, so his father tried installing parental controls to cut off his access. Jonathan disabled them in an afternoon. They unplugged the computer and told him it was bedtime. He waited until the house went quiet, then turned it back on. Nothing about this kid backed down easily. Eventually, reading about hacking wasn't enough. He needed to see if what he'd learned actually worked in the real world. That's when he adopted an alias online, Comrade. Under that name, he started drifting through forums and chat rooms, absorbing techniques that wouldn't even become mainstream knowledge for another decade. Buffer overflows, packet sniffing, port scanning. He wasn't chasing money or secrets. He was breaking into systems just to prove he could, and more often than not, he'd leave a note for the administrator afterward. Here's what's broken, here's how to fix it. His first serious target came in February of 1999 when he broke into Bell South, one of the largest telecommunications companies in the country. For 3 straight nights, he scanned their network until he found an unpatched server, then walked right in. Customer databases, billing systems, internal emails, all of it wide open. Soon after, he slipped into the computer systems of Miami-Dade County's school district, one of the largest in the nation. Each new target was practice. Each one raised the same question in his head. If companies this big could fall this easily, what else was out there? By June of 1999, Jonathan was doing what he always did, poking around the internet late at night, when he stumbled onto a government domain. The scan pointed him toward a server tied to NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. This was NASA, the agency that put men on the moon. And when Jonathan started probing its defenses, he found something almost impossible to believe. Open ports, unsecured remote access, and administrator passwords so weak they looked like a joke. He ran the scan 3 more times, certain there had to be a mistake. There wasn't. NASA's network security was, in his own words, weaker than his high school's. Using a basic buffer overflow in a DNS service, he got in, and within hours, he had access to 13 separate NASA computers. Once inside, he didn't rush. He moved carefully through folders and servers, and eventually he started downloading files, a few at first, then more, until he realized exactly what he was sitting on. More than 3,000 files, including internal documentation for the International Space Station's life support systems, oxygen generation, carbon dioxide removal, water recycling, and the software controlling temperature and humidity aboard the station. If that system failed, astronauts could die, and a teenager now had a copy of the code that ran it. NASA later estimated the value of the stolen software at roughly $1.7 million. But as Jonathan combed through it, what actually struck him was how sloppy it was. Outdated functions, hard-coded values, comments written in 3 different languages. To him, it looked less like a NASA program and more like a rushed college project. "This is garbage," he wrote in a chat channel. "My own operating system handles errors better than this. If NASA is this weak, imagine the Pentagon." And this wasn't even the craziest part. What he did to the Pentagon is what got the FBI knocking on his door. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Jonathan turned his attention to the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, a branch of the Department of Defense responsible for identifying and neutralizing major national security threats. While mapping their network, he found a critical weak point. Their primary router, a Cisco 7206VXR, was running outdated firmware with over a dozen known vulnerabilities. He exploited the flaw and walked straight into a Department of Defense network. A 15-year-old had just broken into the Pentagon. He didn't stop at simply looking around. He found a central point in the network where a huge amount of internal traffic passed through and installed a backdoor there, along with a sniffer program built to quietly monitor and copy everything moving across that server. Employees kept working normally, sending emails, sharing internal reports, completely unaware they had an audience. Between September and October of 1999, Jonathan intercepted more than 3,000 internal emails. Buried inside them were sensitive reports, internal discussions, and, worse, login credentials. He ended up with at least 19 working usernames and passwords for accounts inside the Department of Defense, and he'd built his own private surveillance post without ever tripping a single alarm. He never sold the information or leaked it. He simply saved it all in a folder he labeled Pentagon Trophies. To him, it was still a game. But every time he logged in, he left a trace, and the net was slowly closing. Around this same time, NASA administrators started noticing strange activity, unusual CPU usage on a server supporting the Mars Pathfinder mission. When they dug into the logs, they found a rootkit, hidden backdoor accounts, and evidence that data had been pulled out. NASA made the call to take 43 servers offline entirely to isolate and rebuild them. The Department of Defense was seeing the same pattern, connections appearing and disappearing, data quietly rerouted for weeks on end. When investigators realized the exact same intrusion signature was hitting 2 major federal agencies at once, they raised the alert to the highest level of cybersecurity response. Air Force investigators, criminal investigators, and the FBI's cyber division all converged to hunt down whoever was responsible. They started cross-referencing timestamps, IP addresses, and connection logs, working with telecom companies to trace where the traffic was actually coming from. Jonathan had made one critical mistake. A few times, while testing exploits, he'd connected directly from his own home line, assuming a few seconds wouldn't be logged. On November 14th, investigators traced a 3-second direct connection back to a residence registered to Robert James in Pinecrest, Florida. The ghost finally had a name, Jonathan James, 16 years old, a student at South Miami Senior High School. In December of 1999, the FBI began quietly watching him. For days, they observed a completely ordinary teenager, riding his bike to school, keeping to himself, never causing trouble. When agents spoke with staff at his high school, one teacher told them Jonathan had fixed the school's entire computer network during a single lunch period, something their paid IT contractor hadn't managed in 2 full days. That's when it clicked for investigators. They weren't chasing a criminal mastermind. They were chasing a gifted kid who treated national security like a video game. In the early morning of January 26, 2000, several vehicles pulled up outside the James family home. Armed agents moved in fast, went straight up to Jonathan's bedroom, and arrested him on the spot. There was no time to shut anything down or hide evidence. His parents came downstairs to find federal agents leading their handcuffed son out of the house. In that moment, everything private about his double life became public. During questioning, Jonathan cooperated fully, walking investigators through every method and every vulnerability they hadn't even known existed. Because he was 16, he was tried as a juvenile rather than an adult. In May of 2000, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of unauthorized computer access and was sentenced to 6 months of house arrest, a ban on computer use, and probation until he turned 18. Had he been an adult, prosecutors estimated he could have faced up to 10 years in federal prison. Attorney General Janet Reno personally addressed the case publicly, making it clear that breaking into someone else's computer system was every bit as serious as breaking into their home. Jonathan served his house arrest, and when it ended, he tried to move forward, focusing on school, looking for legitimate work in tech, trying to prove he could follow the rules. For a while, it seemed to work, but living under constant supervision wore on him. During a routine check, he tested positive for drug use, a minor violation on paper, but his probation had 0 tolerance. He was sent to a juvenile detention facility in Alabama for 6 months, far from home and from everything familiar. It was every bit as harsh as he'd feared. He came out at 18, changed, quieter, more guarded, but determined to leave his past behind for good. For a while, the name Comrade faded into history. Then, in January of 2007, one of the largest data breaches in history came to light. Hackers had infiltrated networks belonging to major retail chains and made off with tens of millions of credit and debit card numbers, along with names, addresses, and purchase histories. The scale forced the Secret Service and FBI to launch a full-scale investigation, and the trail eventually led to a man named Albert Gonzalez. Gonzalez had once been part of an online marketplace trading in stolen card data. After getting caught in 2003, he avoided prison by agreeing to become a government informant, but he later went right back to hacking, this time leading a crew that used a technique called war driving. Driving through business districts with a laptop and a high-powered antenna, hunting for unsecured wireless networks. Once inside a company system, they'd quietly siphon off card data, encode it onto blank magnetic strip cards, and pull cash straight out of ATMs. All told, the group stole information tied to roughly 180 million cards, causing an estimated $400 million in losses. As investigators worked outward from Gonzalez, 3 more names surfaced, including someone using the handle JJ. Jonathan James shared an unsettling number of similarities with Gonzalez. Same generation, same hometown, same rare talent for breaking into systems that weren't supposed to be breakable. There was no hard evidence tying him to the scheme, but his past made him an easy person to suspect. By 2008, Jonathan James was 24, unemployed, and still living in the house he grew up in. His mother had died of cancer 6 years earlier. In May of that year, with the investigation still active, the Secret Service carried out simultaneous raids, one at Jonathan's home, one at his brother's, one at his girlfriend's. They seized computers, hard drives, phones, everything that might hold data, just as they had 8 years earlier. But this time, they also found something else in his room, a legally registered handgun and an old, unsent letter that suggested he had once reached a very dark place in his life. Investigators spent days combing through every device they'd taken. They found nothing connecting him to the breach. But less than 2 weeks after the raids, police responded to a call at the James family home. Jonathan James, 24 years old, had died by suicide, leaving behind a note. In it, he wrote that he had lost faith in the justice system, convinced that his history would be held against him no matter what the evidence actually showed, that he'd rather die a free man than live imprisoned for something he hadn't done. Looking back, it's hard to say the fear was ever fully justified. At the time of his death, no charges had been filed against him, and no formal evidence tied him to the breach. When the case was finally resolved in 2010, Albert Gonzalez was sentenced to 20 years. An accomplice named Christopher Scott received 7, and the man behind the JJ alias turned out to be someone else entirely, a hacker named Stephen Watt. Jonathan James was never charged with anything. His story left a real mark. The vulnerabilities he exposed at NASA and the Pentagon forced a serious rethink of how the government approached digital defense, proving that security isn't just about budget. It's about understanding how an attacker actually thinks. But his life is also a warning about what happens when enormous talent collides with too much pressure and not enough support. Jonathan James went from prodigy to convicted felon in a matter of months, and never fully found his way back from the shadow that followed him afterward. For a lot of people who followed his story, he represents something painfully close to what could have been. Someone who might have accomplished extraordinary things if only the circumstances around him had been different. If a story like this pulled you in, wait until you hear what really happened at Chernobyl. That's coming next, so subscribe now and don't miss it.